Hey everybody, good afternoon. Waiting for folks to join in. Hey, hey everybody. Hey. Okay, so I'm Therese Nelson, and we are back at it for entering our fourth month of this really beautiful conversation collaborative between BlackFoodFolks and Afropunk called The Politics of Food. The conversations we've had over the last 3 months have been amazing, and today's conversation is on track to be among the very best, the most precious. I'm so excited to have June and Angela Provost from Provost Farms out of New Iberia, Louisiana, for a really sort of sober conversation about what real farming is like right now. So let me add them in. Hey. Let's see. Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
So excited to have you guys on. I'm appreciative of you all taking the time to have this conversation.
Oh, we're so thankful. We are very appreciative and honored for any chance to share our story. We feel like it's a collective story. We're not isolated in our experience. We just want to make sure that we're able to tell it and create some change while we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Amen. So I want to start because I think a lot of people who maybe aren't familiar with you guys' story may have come to your story through the 1619 project. Over the time since then, you all have been on lots of media platforms, sort of sharing your story and sort of trying to be as transparent as possible to give folks a kind of perspective on this notion of what Black farming really is. And I guess I would love it if you all would be willing to of farming and sort of like, vegetable crops or like animal farming and don't really sort of understand the very particular lane you guys are farming in.
So we were farming a commodity crop known as sugarcane. Our farm is less than 100 acres now. At one time, it reached out to almost 5,000 acres through discrimination and fraud practices, which are one and the same. That farm was taken from us. But we are on a journey towards reparations and restitution, right? So not only do we want what we had, we want that land back, but we want to be where we were supposed to be and what our legacy calls for.
That's right.
And to give people a scope of what sugarcane farming is, sugar for the Americas has always been a wealth building crop. It's the #1 lobby crop in the US, and it has a lot of rules and regulations that create wealth for the farmers who are farming sugarcane, right? And throughout history, Black people have paid the price and the cost of farming that crop, but not have reaped the benefits of it, right? So not just monetary, but health-wise, environmental-wise, all of these things that we could be using sugar for to build our communities, our political power, our families, and so on. So
and to kind of give like a background, I'm a fourth generation sugarcane farmer. And in this community at one time, we had over 60 Black farming families. I mean, families, not individuals. You're talking about, 4 or 5 kids per family. I mean, the generational wealth that's lost now, because all these farm families are out of business. Right now, there are only 4 families left farming. And if it stays at this rate here, another year or two, we will be out completely. I mean, and when I say generational wealth, I mean, I'm not talking about like houses and cars. I'm talking about, land, real wealth. I mean, that is lost now. I should be right now in a position to train my nephews, but that is gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is a loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so much of what is interesting about you guys' story is the way that it models what's happening for farmers all across the country. I feel like sugarcane and sort of the crop you guys were most generationally responsible for is a very particular crop to your area, right? So you think about, the same way you think about corn in Iowa, you think about other crops that are very particular to the place in which they've grown. Sugarcane it has its legacy so tied to the area you guys are from. And to that, there's such a listen to you story, you all talk a lot about the political mechanisms that keep that ecosystem moving. And the real story, I think, that is so it's the heartbreaking part, but it's also the part that we need to be most, I guess, aware of is the fact that these systems are still operating, they're still moving, and because people aren't engaged in what that looks like and what the disenfranchisement looks like, we don't really recognize that these are stories we all have to be sort of diligent about. So I'm wondering if you all could talk a little bit about what activation in terms of people who aren't necessarily in the farming world could look like to help support farmers who are in these predicaments all across the country.
So one of the things that we always like to start our conversation on is that our conversation is based on the racial caste system that was set forth in the Americas during the colonial period that still affect us today, right? And when I say affects us, I mean all of us. That's the best way to get people involved in the conversation. You may be working in a cubicle in Chicago, but you are certainly touched by our experience here in New Iberia, Louisiana, while we're riding in our tractor in the field, right? All of these laws that are governing us have been are all part of a historical narrative that ties to the brutality of capitalism and plantation economics, right? So, we just want to make sure that people are aware of policies and how those policies that we talk about today, when we're talking about voting rights issues, criminal justice reform, housing especially, all of these issues can be tied back to our historical narrative of the South and the land, right? And so if people could really address or relate to the certain issues that really bind us together and what we should be fighting for, we can all go back to agriculture. Even though we may not understand farming or how to grow things, certainly in our legacy and our history, agriculture has been the basis for many of the laws created in the United States, and it has all been set up on a racial caste system, the enslavement of Black people, the exploitation of Black bodies. And so we just want people to know that, all of these key issues that we talk about today, you can trace them back to the roots of what America was, and it was the exploitation of Black bodies and a quick dollar off of a crop. And we're so passionate about our sugar crops because they're subtropical crops. These crops are not European-based crops. They are from the tropics. They are from where Black and brown people are, right? They are from our homelands. And we were the ones who were teaching Europeans how to farm these crops, right? So it's time now for us to regain what was our legacy, not off of the brutality of others, but the upliftment of all. And so, yeah, we are, there are so many ways for people to become active and activate around Black farmers. And just knowing that when you activate around Black farmers, you are in turn making positive changes for your own community and yourselves, because it's all a trickle down effect, right? So, yeah.
And as Black farmers, I mean, we just want someone just to say thank you, or just, tell us sometimes we're doing a good job. I mean, because, the numbers, if you go from 1920 to where we are now, it's some startling numbers. I mean, we are diminishing day by day. So we have to spread the word and And I always say the main thing for me is to make sure that less than 2% of farmers continue farming. We need them to continue farming. We have to stay active and keep us farming and try to get the next generation involved and I always say a tractor now is like an office. I mean, you have computers, air conditioning, radio. I just want the younger generation to know it's not like, you know, you're out in the elements. I mean, you're actually, it's nothing better than to be in a tractor, you know, tilling the soil and as for me as a farmer, that's like, because I always say it was nothing greater for me to be in a tractor riding and seeing my dad in a tractor and my brothers in a tractor. There's not a better feeling in the world to just see us all just, you know, going back and forth. And then for lunch, we all just stop the tractors and we all just like, you know, eat a quick lunch for 30 minutes and just take off again. It's nothing better than that.
Yeah. Like black farming for us is like that. It's one of the things that we always tell people is that we always use terms of enslavement to describe black farmers, right? Like negative connotation to sharecropping, you know, the hard work that farming is, which farming is definitely hard work, but it's highly mechanized right now, you know, and it's only it more mechanized as we go into the future. So we have to change our language around what black farming should be, right? What we want it to be and what we hold dear to our community. And it is, like, again, I said, it is a source for family and community. It's a source for infrastructural building in your communities, in your neighborhoods. There are so many things that we can, you know, discuss, and when we're talking about all of the things that we're
and forgive me, I know we get kind of excited,
yeah,
but I always tell people it's nothing better than putting your hands in the dirt and especially now with the COVID, you realize how important it is to grow food now too. So it excites us to see so many people are growing, even if it's in a backyard in a 4x4 plot, just growing one plant. You know, it's nothing more exciting than seeing that one seed you plant and it makes like a bountiful harvest. It's just nothing more important than that. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So I would love if you all could talk a little bit, because again, if you are not familiar with June and Angela Provost, please, you can Google them, you can find you can go to their website, you can follow them here on Instagram, and sort of dig more into their story in terms of the hardship. But one of the things that I've loved so much and been so inspired by watching you guys, especially over the last year or so, has been your ability to find joyfulness and purpose in the midst of what is some aggressively offensive, systematic, oppression is the wrong word, because it's more than oppression. It's targeted, it's specific. Yes. Exactly. And so the Provost Foundation, Provost Family Farm Foundation, is something you guys have sort of has been born out of what could have been for other people a decimated, a sort of a catastrophic loss. You all have turned into what is going to be, and I know for sure is going to be, this really beautiful home for preserving legacy. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and sort of the process of getting here to really add that kind of.
So we started out, it was in 2018, we created a GoFundMe, and we started the GoFundMe to protect this home here. We're living in my mother-in-law's home, and about 50 yards behind this house was our home, which was foreclosed on in 2018 as well, right? So in both of these homes are tied to USDA guaranteed debt, right? Yeah. So we're getting deep in the weeds on this one. So we started the GoFundMe to create to save at least this home here, right? And then it blossomed into a bigger project, and it hasn't officially been named, but we're coining it the Provost Farm Heritage Center in Green Space. which means that it is a safe space for everything that ties us back to the earth and the environment. And so we want to be the place that people can come in this particular area that's centered around plantation tourism. We want to be the antithesis of that, and bring some real knowledge and real in-depth conversation around what it means for us as Black people, not only to be Black farmers, but to live in rural communities, and how those communities are affected by big ag, how they're affected by discrimination, how they're affected by retaliation and environmental issues. And we just want to be able to have this be a safe space where people can come learn and commune, and have farm to table dinners, because my grandparents, although farm to table is a new coined term right now, we've grown up on farm to table dinners, right?
Definitely.
So in the rural South, that's all we had, right? You had to go miles for grocery stores. And so, yeah, we are just really looking forward to that gaining more support. We need more support from people for this project because it is a pretty lofty, big project. We want to make sure that we have the proper funds for it, but also that we have the security for it, because we know we'll get pushback for doing this here. It's not something that you'll find in rural New Iberia, right? And so, yeah, we are just really excited to get started in doing all of this. And we're just really,
And
looking forward
I
to
also want it to be to where it's dedicated to Black and brown farmers, because you know, farming is rough, but like my dad and so many of the dads around here, they went through stress and listen, they went through hell. I mean, pretty much, because you know, you'll see fields sometimes with white farmers, their grandfather's still 90 years old, 95 years old, riding the truck, and you know, he always coined this phrase that, oh, we never retire. But as Black farmers, we don't get that. You know, my dad died at a young age, and so many of them died at a young age. I mean, there's a graveyard, and there's probably 20, 30 farmers in this particular graveyard, all died at a young age. But it was always the stress of, you know, if we're going to get a crop loan, when we're going to get a crop loan, how much that crop loan is going to be funded. Those things take a toll on your body. I mean, it really does. And for me, you know, being our home was 50 yards away from my mom and dad's home. You know, I built that home so I could take care of my parents when they got older. So, you know, the first thing when we walk out of our home, my mom's home, we see our home. So for a long, long time, that has been like the roughest thing. Like, you know, and I don't like to bring it up, but it's just, you know, one time I contemplated suicide because it's just like they took everything from me.
Yeah,
you
they
know?
attempted to take your soul. What we did as a farm, so everything that we've tried to do has been a healing process for us, mentally and physically, because it takes a physical toll on your body as well. And we're just constantly motivated to keep going. What we did shortly after moving into my mother-in-law's home is we built what we call the resistance garden, which spreads from her backyard to what was our front yard. And we're growing everything that is indigenous to our culture, like okra, you know, all of those things that we feel, you know, we use for cooking, right? And we grow all those products. We plan to sell a lot of those products this year, but because of COVID, we donated a great deal of them that have, and everything is still growing and moving forward. And we're just really happy about that. And, you know, we're hoping that we can just at least garner enough attention and support so that we can get the Heritage Center and Green Space going, because we want it to be a place that is very eco-friendly as well, so that we can sort of modernize the way that we think about farming. And communicating about our issues too, right? So that we can galvanize different organizations into one spot, so that we're all on the same page. We may not always agree on how to get there, but we are all on the same page of what we need. And for us, that is reparations. And so we are just really excited for the future. Of course, we have the litigation that's going on that you can also look up. But we try not to focus on the litigation because the litigation is very stressful and traumatic for us, right? And to be honest with you, I have very little faith in our court system, right? Especially here in the D.
Especially now.
Yeah. And so, but we are very motivated by people galvanizing together and praying for us, protecting us, and supporting us in a way that we're all working together for the same thing. And that is justice comes in many forms for us. And so we're working towards that. So yeah.
Now, June, I would love it if you could. I mean, I don't. There's so much. You all have shared your story so often, and I certainly don't want to sort of trigger any sort of for you to have to bear yourself in a way that revisits a really dark time, because again, like you're talking about systemic and like strategic targeting of you and your family's legacy. To be able to find peace in the midst of all of that, to lose your fire. I mean, just all of these elements that were compounding themselves back to back. I'm sure, like you said, took a toll on your spirit, took a toll on your mental health, just took a toll on your ability to want to fight. But I guess I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this 4-generation legacy, because there's something really beautiful in particular about having such a sense of self and home and of like your right to humanity so tied to something as tangible as land. And I would love it if you could talk about that, but also into like your family's fight with the Pickford case. Like there's so much resistance in your family's legacy that I would love it if you could just share, because I think it will give people a sort of perspective on why you all are fighting so hard right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably start with, say, from my grandfather. My dad actually had to quit school to help his dad on the farm. So the first year they actually made 600 tons of cane, just to kind of put it in perspective. But as the years went by, that 600 tons turned into, we was making 100,000 tons. So the love of farming started with my great grandfather, but for me, it because I was too young, I didn't get a chance to know my grandfather because they passed at a young age. But for me, idolizing my dad was my hero. He was my everything. I mean, I wanted to be just like my dad. And to see how the love that he had of farming and the land was just, like I always say, we would work a 10 or 12-hour day, but we'd get back home at the round table, we would eat, we would talk about farming for the rest of the next hour or two. So, I mean, and to know that I was farming the same fields that my grandfather was farming. I mean, that's powerful to know my grandfather walked these fields and
this land here, we live on land that his grandfather bought during the civil rights era. And he was able to buy the land because he was growing his sugar operation.
So to lose that is hard, because you can't replace that. You can replace material things, but to replace land that my grandfather bought, on the back of his hard work, that is hard. That is something that is so hard for me to take. But I mean, I get a little emotional, but to just to go back in the times of being there with the family. Sometimes, we bicker. But it was all love, though. I mean, is to have, like, because I had two brothers and my dad, and how we would just go and because we was a 50-mile radius from the farm shop to our father's field, and to go ride with each other and into the field, and then we all get into tractors. It is just, that was an amazing feeling, and to have that taken from you is just, is heartbreaking. And it's not just isolated to my family. It's all the families around this area went through the same thing. You know, we didn't have any kids, so it allowed us to, I guess, fight more, because sometimes we didn't have enough money for a loaf of bread. But, you know, if we had a child, that would have been different. You know, we could have go without that loaf of bread. And it's like, literally, we sometimes, you know, we scraped up coins around here to buy a loaf of bread. That's how rough it was. You know,
but nothing could replace that family bond. And I think one of the things that we have to talk about that we sometimes forget to bring up, we're always talking about those traumatic experiences and that beauty as well too, and being with your family and working with your family and all of those things. But I think we need to start discussing more about why things are the way that they are and the specific policies that have geared, right? And these are not just by accident, and it's totally by design. So everything, I always like to say that we are here on the land that June's grandfather purchased. But prior to the antebellum times, this used to be part of the Olivier and Patu plantation land, right? Before that, it was owned by the Native American people, the Chittimachas, right? But certainly its most exploited time was when it was owned by the plantation system. And there have been laws ever since the Civil War where these plantations have been subsidized so that they could eventually get that land back. And that has been off of our backs. And those things are really violent in nature. And the laws that protect that are very violent in nature. So we have to really be very vocal in how we describe these acts that are placed against us. We don't like to just say they're civil rights laws, but they're terrorist acts on our bodies and our minds. And it's been so difficult for us at times where we feel like, man, we don't even deserve to live or be here, but we got to put ourselves in check, right? And say that that's part of the conditioning. The conditioning is that you are supposed to live in blighted conditions. You're supposed to not have food sovereignty. You're supposed to be incarcerated, or you're supposed to not be able to afford anything, right? And so we have to get back to where we can start discussing all of these factors and issues and really hone in on those policies that are blocking us from succeeding. And I have to say that they are literally blocking us from succeeding, because when I say that, that means I'm trying to get people to pressure, right? To be hold them accountable for the things that they are saying in public, but what they do behind closed doors and the money that they take in. Hold these corporations accountable, right? These judges that are elected to these seats, hold them accountable. And people will always say, well, why don't you run for office? Well, I'm not running for office because my job is to go out there and farm. That's why we have a voting system, so that we can elect people to represent us, right? And we have been solely misrepresented. We have been misrepresented to no end. Let's just go for an example. We are here, and this is not just speaking about June and myself, but this talks about my aunt who's currently has 300 acres of prime real estate that's under foreclosure process with the USDA for debt way back in the 1970s. And when you look at that, you'll say, well, some like capitalistic corporate person might come in and say, well, maybe they just didn't know what they were doing with their finances, or they didn't know how to farm. Well, I can tell you one thing, that's a collective problem with us as Black farmers. We're not given enough money to farm, right? We're given maybe 10 cents on the dollar for what your average white farmer is getting, right? Mm-hmm. So how are we supposed to know how to farm when you're not giving us the proper resources to farm? But then also when we go into these places to get loans or grants or whatever it is to operate our farms, they're under supervised bank accounts, right? So that means they're telling us what to do. So when you're telling us what to do and we don't have enough to farm, you're going to turn around and say it's our farming practices? No, it's your exploitive nature. right? So that exploitive nature needs to be changed. We have to change the policies. I know people are asking, what can we do to help? Well, ask yourself, what can you do to help yourself? Because once there are no more Black farmers, we are in a dire place. When there are no more Black landowners, we are in a dire place. Many of us have gotten our degrees and have moved to cities, but that wealth gap is increasing. The wealth gap is increasing because we don't own land. We have no real assets, right? And so, and we need to start thinking about that in real terms, in terms that's not exploitive. We need to come together as communities and co-ops to own these lands. We need to come together with all of our organizations instead of being so divided. We can have multiple organizations. We can have the Federation and we can have National Black Growers Council. We can have the Urban League and the NACP, but we have to come together, because one thing that you will see on the news is that you will see the other side, the so-called conservative side. Although they may bicker behind closed doors, they're very together in public. We have to be very, very mindful of that, and we have to come together. And we need to realize the reason why we are here is because these policies that are governing us can be so loosely translated in a conservative court, and they're very exploitive, and they come from the exploitation of enslaved people. And so we really have to be very cognizant of that and understand. And when you're asking, what can you do to help? Go to farmers. Like I said, GoFundMe has been our biggest crowning glory to keep our message sustaining. But go on GoFundMe and see if you can find other Black farmers that are trying to raise money, right? We need reparations. But what that also means, though, is that you have to turn to your politicians and your organizations and ask them, what are you doing to help directly fund Black farmers and keep them funded? We need the proper laws to protect us. So I'll give people an example. So I'm a big believer in universal health care. I believe that everyone has the fair right to access to health. That's a moral issue, it's a political issue, and it's a sustainability issue. But I want to make sure that once I have health care and all my neighbors have health care, that Black people, that we are treated fairly once we get to the hospital. So what laws are there? And what enforcement of those laws are there to protect us once we're at the hospital? And that's what I equate to Black farming. I see a lot of what's happening. We were on a phone call with the Biden campaign, right? A few days ago. And I can tell you I hung up furious, right? Because it was very paper thin. And one of the things we were told was that, we cannot help one group of people over another. And my immediate thought was, isn't that what's been happening, right? And so it's about funding, it's about reparations, but it's about the enforcement of those laws, And so, yeah, it's a long battle. It's a good fight. We know we won't see everything in our generation, but we're doing it, right? And we just ask that everybody else get involved and just start galvanizing and collecting as well.
And I guess the hardest thing too is just like, especially this industry, they're always saying we need young farmers. We need young farmers. Well, what are we? We are young farmers. And another thing too is not all these families that went out of business, 4 generation, 5 generation farmers. There's no way in the world all of a sudden these people don't know how to farm. Mm-hmm. Farming practices are bad. Something went on there. So while all the time, all these 4 and 5 generation farmers are going out of business, but here you have white farmers, young farmers have 0 farming in their family, all of a sudden just pop up with 1,000 or 2,000 acres. They want Black and brown people to work on that farm, work for them. They don't want us to own it though, and that's a huge problem, and it has to be fixed.
Because one of the things when you all were talking, June, when you were talking earlier, the loan process part is the part I think that people aren't really understanding. There's a way in which our government thinks about and understands the power and necessity of farmers and the mechanism, the ecosystem that is created to keep this whole sort of system moving along. But there is legitimate targeting and specificity in the way they're trying to disenfranchise Black farmers. The qualified loans are sort of the what's the terminology used with the where you have 4 generations of farming knowledge and you are having a loan that is dictating the practices you're supposed to use to operate your business. It sounds crazy, but this is 2018. This is 2020. This is what's happening today. First, yeah, thank you. This is so dope. I would love it if you could talk a little. You all were on a conversation last week with the Museum of Food and Drink with Rashid Nuri, and I think a lot about the intergenerational necessity in Black farming. This sort of idea, especially now, so many of our older Black farmers get into ages where they need a baton pass, and there not being enough young people to sort of take that mantle up. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I'm thinking about Ben Burkett, I'm thinking about, Will Scott, I'm thinking about, Tim Pickford, and what your relationship is like in this sort of intergenerational conversation, because so much of what you guys do in terms of leadership is accepting the role of leadership as young farmers and sort of as folks who have to sort of stake a claim in this moment. And I'm wondering, we still have Shirley Sherrod alive, and we still have all these amazing voices, these powerful and we have these folks around and here with this wisdom, and I'm wondering about what that looks like for you guys.
So a lot of what we do, so we go to our elders for a lot of the wisdom, and so what they've told us, they've been so supportive in our fight. They're just excited to see young folk wanting to do the work, right? And what we've always what's been passed on to us is to take what they've done and just perfect it and bring it forward and bring out more of the issues that they were fighting for their time, right? Especially with Tim Pickford. Tim has had the life of, he is, so one of the things about Black men that I always like to say is that we are community organized. And we don't speak enough about how the impact of community organization that Tim Pickford brought, right? What we also don't speak enough about is the direct assault on himself and the Black farmers who participated in the Pickford litigation. So when we're speaking to our elders, when we're speaking to Tim, that beautiful conversation we had with Mr. Nuri, Ben Burkett visited us about a year or so ago. When we speak to them, they tell us the difficult aspects of what they had to endure, right? And it's more of the same. Those patterns and practices still continue. And, one of the things that we talk to them about is some of the resources and assets that we have that they didn't have, like social media, right? Yeah. They couldn't get on a Instagram Live and start spreading their message out to different people. It was a bit more isolated, much more isolated. When we're talking to my grandmother and my grandfather are driving forces. They own their farm about 30 miles from here. They are driving forces, and the message is so beautiful to hear from our elders and respect them, right? Some of this stuff is like, man, it's real old school. but we love it and we honor it, and we just try to take all the things that we can to build up that message and just take it further, right? And going
back to Mr. Tim, we call him Uncle Tim. So we became actually like great friends. I probably talk with him maybe once every 2-3 weeks, and it's like a 2-hour conversation at a time. It's like an encyclopedia. Yeah. And at his age, I mean, he still wants to farm today.
Yeah.
So when we talk, we're talking about tractors, farming, just like we talk politics, we talk a lot of different things. But the sad part is just like for the USDA, when he was going through the Pickford lawsuit, those people who were in office who they had problems with back in whenever it was 1990s, those same workers are still working in those offices today. So do you think their mindset changed? No, they're still in those offices, still trying to do the same thing today as they did back then.
They're trying to uphold the laws that their ancestors wrote for them, right? And so that's exactly what they're doing. They feel like because at some certain point that their great-great-grandfather, who was an overseer or of the planter class, that somehow we infringed on their rights or we're trying to take from them. Well, actually, I don't want what you have. I want what my legacy calls for, right? And so, we are so thankful for the older generation just sort of guiding us and leading us. We're so excited for the generation to come and seeing everybody mobilize in the streets and collectively in organizations. It is just a being. And I'll say we got to carry on that message and make sure that we're not doing it in exploitation of others, because we don't want to take the evil side of what we've been conditioned into, right? Make sure that we are honing in on a brighter future for ourselves and the next generation. And I think I'm hopeful that we're on that right path. We have to be very honest though, right? So like we have to hold people accountable because we expect people to hold us accountable. We have to make sure we're holding people accountable for the things that they say. And one of the things that we want people to know is that if you feel insignificant or if you feel like you can't make change, our big message is that we can't talented tent our way out of this. This is going to be something from the bottom up. Yes, it's going to be something from the bottom up, and it's not going to be a debutante from this place or somebody from over here is, like doesn't even have the respect for Black farmers and Black landowners that we call for. What we want is, this is something from the bottom up. This is something that all of us, no matter our class or in where we live, that we can galvanize around each other and very honest with our message of what we need. Very hopeful to be able to continue to do this. And I also have to say, in asking what can people do to help, please pray for us, pray for our protection, protect us, right? Because those of us who are actually acting and doing things, there's a lot of reprisal and retaliation involved. And it calls for a lot of sleepless nights. And so we are just, pray for us, protect us.
Because, we still get the cars that's passing in front of our home and stopping, and, those type of tactics still are happening.
Yeah.
And kind of to give some of the viewers, like when we was, actively farming, we had those things like vandalism, dead cats put in the tractors. I mean, you name it, we had it. I mean, they bust the diesel. I mean, we had everything that you can possibly think of happen to us.
Yeah. And one thing too I'd like to go back to is that we should ask people more to research the Pickford litigation, right? Pickford too. Speak to farmers who are actually involved in the Pickford litigation and the effects of where they are now. Most of them are not farming anymore, right? And most of them still have debt, right? tied to the USDA and that Pickford litigation. So I want to go back to, if you listen to the 1590 podcast, episode 2. One of the reporters Khalil interviewed one of the lawyers for Pickford litigation, that $50,000 was better than nothing, or that it was respectable. On the contrary, right? Because what that $50,000 did is that it proved that the government sees us as Black people as monolith, right? Another is it called for retaliation against all the Black farmers named in the settlement. And
That's
so
right.
we have to really look into these things and understand that the laws, again, that are governing all of these bad policy decisions. So I just really ask that people really look into the Pickford litigation, get to know farmers that have been involved and hear their story. There is an account called Acres of Ancestry. We urge all of you to follow Acres of Ancestry because they are doing a very good job in interviewing a lot and getting their story out there. And so please, I'm pretty sure if you live somewhere in a community where there were Black farmers, that you can find somebody who was involved in the Pickford litigation. Also ask our HBCUs what they're doing about it, because one of the things that we don't talk about with our 1890 schools is that, of course, we know they're underfunded, but a lot of times when they get their funding, that funding has a noose on it, right? And it can only be used for certain things. And sometimes those certain things are not to deplete or shrink that wealth gap, right? It's up to hold us in some certain positions. And we can speak to that directly. We know about those things. And so, yeah, we are just if people can really look into that.
And one question just popped up, and it just like really, like, how can they take land that you own? But what happens to Black farmers, they make you collateralize everything you have. Yes. It should be just equipment and your crop. But as Black farmers, they make you collateralize your house, your car, pretty much anything that you have, they want collateral over it.
Yeah.
And that is the reason that for instance, our home was foreclosed on, and so many other Black farmers are,
So it's our lawyer about the allegations within the federal lawsuit or the lawsuit against the sugar mill. But the reason why that they can take what you own is because they have been operating in power for over 400 years, right? And so they have been writing laws on the books, and they have been collateralizing everything down to our soul. And at times when they do that, they are practicing fraud at the same time. That's why I don't like to call racism and discrimination civil rights laws, because to me, they're all criminal. They're crimes against humanity. And you have access to power. You have access to change numbers behind closed doors. You have access to manipulate how someone's portrayed to a board when you're not there. You have access to know where and when that person is at all times, as if you still own them. And so those things are really still happening. And so it's just bringing truth to light, because all of these practices are not sustainable. One of the things that we talk to our white counterparts about is the exploitation of Black bodies. Means that the capitalistic system that we know of today is built off of exploitation in general, right? So once we're out, they're going to find another person or group to exploit to build that capitalistic exploitive brand. And so we always tell people, although your problems, please don't equate a small white farmer's problem to Black farmers, because you're not doing us justice, right? You're not. But one of the things that we say that you probably can relate to us on is the fact that you're not getting fair treatment and fair representation. And so, we really are very aware of some of these tactics. We're still learning and growing. And so a lot of these tactics, if people could just really research research them, learn about the Pickford litigation, and you know, just kind of educate yourself on all of these things that have happened.
That you mentioned about the parody that came out of the Pickford v. Glickman case was really about sort of not being specific about what all these folks who were in class needed individually. Like, it was a sense of like, well, here we paid you these dollars, we are no longer culpable. But your point, and I think the point people should really sort of be thinking about when they are going back to, I mean, again, if you just Google Pickford v. Glickman, you're going to find decades of journalism, decades of video. I mean, you can find actual precedent, but this was a class action lawsuit that held to account our government for legitimate specific crimes. That's the other part, right? These things that we know intuitively, but we have to be able to prove them and sort of specify what exactly the offense is. And because of, so much of what June shared with us has been about how some of these offenses are so subversive and covert, and we within practices that ends up gaslighting you and making you feel like, well, no, this is just how things are done, not necessarily that they are targeted and racist. You have to be able to call a thing a thing. And what the power, I think, of what Mr. Pickford did, and people like Shirley Sherrod, who were entrenched in the SDA, did, was being able to have the language to call the thing, and it's to sort of qualify what these offenses were. And it really kind of came down to loan practices and the insidious nature of the just predatory practices. Please, just, you can Google and find the rabbit hole down the Pickford case is a very particular one that will get you, if that doesn't get you activated and get you ready to be part of this new wave of change that's coming, I don't know what will.
Exactly. I see someone ask the question about talking about farmers, and I can tell you that access to any sort of public resource or private resource is very limited for Black farmers. And so that goes back to policies, right? But we also always have to make sure, I just want people to understand, because we have an election season coming up, and we had one in 2016. And I have to preface this by saying I'm a very progressive person, right? And I believe in a lot of social reforms. But the one thing about it is, though, is that I want to make sure that when those reforms are passed, because I do believe in a better day that they will be passed, things like universal health care, things that end mass incarceration, and policing issues and all of that. I want to make sure that all of these things are passed in a way that holds people accountable. Again, that holds these laws accountable, and that cannot be loosely interpreted in a conservative court. And so the resources for Black farmers, whether they're public or private, are very limited, especially when we're struggling, right? And many of us are. And so many of us that are remaining are. And so, yeah, just like, I wholeheartedly believe that social reform can assist in helping to alleviate some of those pressures that the wealth gap causes.
Yes.
And so, but we also have to make sure that those social reforms and the people who are advocating for them, the politicians that are advocating for them, and the lawyers that fight for them are held accountable. So yeah, and one of the things that I'd also like to say is, when we talk about the wealth gap, when we talk about Black farmers, that we talk about wealth being different from income. Income allows
That part,
life, right? Mm-hmm. Wealth can replace income, but income cannot replace wealth, right? And so being Black farmers, being landowners, allows us to build wealth. And like June was saying, when we talk about wealth, we're talking about infrastructure in our our communities. We're talking about schools and stores and all those things that build community and fellowship, right? Income allows you to buy a house in the suburbs and a nice view, but wealth allows you to build community. And so those are things we have to be very aware of when we're talking about wealth versus income. Mm-hmm. And Black farmers and Black land ownership, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. I love y'all so much, and I appreciate you all sharing your story and just taking this time. It's so empowering to watch you all turn what is, I'm speaking into the universe. You all call it cultivated equity. You are going to get back what you got stolen, but as you fight for that, and as that, so because again, people also, Pickford was decades of investment of time and effort. That was, folks passing away, folks, generations having to be invested in, sort of hunker down to be willing to have this, like, to not know that you're going to get to the end, but just hunkering down to fight consistently through different administrations. Like you had to sort of have the fortitude to be willing to go through this long game. And so as you all hunker down for your long game, I'm just so appreciative that you all are finding ways to share your story, to empower other folks. Can't wait to see what your foundation comes into. If you could just I just want to leave the last minutes just to give folks your links for going to your GoFundMe, your website, all those things, so people can, first of all, just follow them. Make sure you're following them via socials here, but just all of the ways in which people can get in touch with you guys.
I just want to say thank you, everybody. Thank you all for supporting us and hearing us. Again, pray for us, pray for our protection. You can support us on a personal level. We have a GoFundMe page. It's under Provost Farm, Cultivate Equity. We also have a website which is currently under construction. It's being developed. We want it to be a place in the meantime while we're trying to build this heritage center for people to come to, leave messages and convene. So we want to, it's called wfarmllc.com, and real organizations that are doing the work out there and can do things in the name of Black any of these benefits. But we also have to profits to not farmers, but to quote unquote educate us. And I'm here to tell you, we have enough education on how to farm. Black people, we know how to farm. Trust me, if you have not planted something and you go out there and try to plant, all your ancestors are going to come through you and say, this is how you do it. Right?
That's right.
So, yeah. So there's got to be enough, there's got to be some of that stopping, that boot camping on how to farm and learning how, on actually getting us back onto the land, telling us that we're land and planting, in other words, right?
And you can find us.
Okay.
But, my handle is June Raising Cane, and
I'm Angela, Provost Farms.
Yeah. So, and if you have any questions about anything of farming, please don't hesitate to reach out, because that's, I guess you can see how much I love playing in the dirt. So whatever questions, I would love to answer them. So just anytime.
And I just want to publicly acknowledge that a lot of people say that they admire us for sticking together through all of these difficulties, but that's the glory of Black love. And that when we are facing adversities, there's no people that can better understand us other than each other. And June and I have definitely gotten closer through this. He has always been my best friend. I believe that we have been called to do this, and thankful for everyone's support, and we love you all. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right. Thank y'all so much, and I will talk to y'all soon. That's right.
Thank
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.
Okay, y'all. So I'm just, yeah, we all got our lives, and there was certainly a lot of things we maybe weren't able to cover fully, but you can certainly please go follow the Provost on their website, here on all socials really, and just try and support and just stay aware of what's happening, what's going on. You can head over right now to Black Food Folks. Right now at 1 o'clock, we have Vonnie Williams, who's talking with who is she with? Francesca Cheney. And they're having a conversation around sort of the wine spirit world. And then later on at 7 o'clock, the very brilliant Mavis and MJ and Cicely we had on a couple weeks ago are going to be on Black Food Folks with their drink tank, which is always a fun time. They talk about the sort of events of the day and all kinds of other shenanigans. So please share this, rewatch it, follow the Provost and get into their work, but also head on over right now to Black Food Folks because there's a conversation going on. Thank y'all, and I'll see you guys next week.